Why books never fully disappeared. Every few years, someone predicts the end of books, first with radio, then television, then the internet, and now artificial intelligence and short-form video. Yet books remain, not as relics, but as a stubbornly persistent form of human thought. Books are often treated as cultural artifacts or educational tools, but at their core they function as a technology, one specifically designed to support deep thinking. Unlike faster media forms that prioritize immediacy, stimulation, or rapid consumption, books impose a structure that slows the mind down and holds attention in place. That structure is not accidental. It is what allows complex ideas to be developed, sustained, and understood in ways that fragmented media rarely achieve. A book typically unfolds in a linear sequence. One idea leads to another, then builds into broader arguments, narratives, or conceptual frameworks. This sequential design matters because human cognition is highly sensitive to context and continuity. When attention is fragmented, jumping between notifications, short videos, or isolated posts, the brain tends to process information in disconnected bursts. Books counter this tendency by creating a stable cognitive environment where ideas can accumulate rather than compete for attention. This is especially important for abstract or layered thinking. Concepts in philosophy, science, history, and literature often depend on multiple steps of reasoning. A single argument may require definitions, examples, counterarguments, and synthesis. Books provide the necessary mental runway for this kind of thinking. They allow the reader to hold earlier points in memory while integrating new ones, gradually building a more complete understanding. In this sense, reading a book is less like receiving information and more like constructing a mental model. Another key feature of books as a thinking technology is their control over pacing. Unlike audio or video, which dictate timing, books allow the reader to regulate speed. A difficult paragraph can be reread, paused over, or compared with earlier passages. This self-directed pacing strengthens comprehension and encourages active engagement rather than passive reception. The reader is constantly making micro-decisions about how to interpret, re-examine, and connect ideas. Books also create a unique form of cognitive isolation that supports focus. When reading, external stimuli are minimized. There are no autoplay suggestions, no scrolling feeds, and no competing streams of content. This reduction of distraction is not just convenient, it fundamentally changes the quality of attention. Deep thinking requires sustained mental presence, and books are one of the few widely used media designed to encourage exactly that state. Historically, this design has made books the primary medium for preserving and transmitting complex knowledge. Entire disciplines, mathematics, political theory, psychology, and literature have been shaped through book-length arguments. The format allows for nuance, contradiction, and development over time, which is essential when dealing with subjects that cannot be reduced to simple statements. Even when knowledge is later summarized or digitized, its foundational structure often originates in book form. Importantly, reading a book also trains the mind to think in extended sequences. Over time, regular readers often develop greater patience for ambiguity, stronger working memory for ideas, and improved ability to follow complex arguments. In this way, books do not just present deep thinking, they actively cultivate it. The act of reading becomes a form of cognitive training, reinforcing the very skills required to understand the material itself. In a world increasingly shaped by rapid information flow, books remain distinct because they resist compression. They cannot be fully appreciated in a glance or reduced without loss. Their value lies in duration, in the time it takes to move through them and the mental space they require. As a technology of deep thinking, books endure not because they are old, but because they are structurally aligned with how complex understanding is built, slowly, sequentially, and with sustained attention. Physical books are often justified in practical terms: convenience, readability, or lack of screen fatigue, but their endurance goes far beyond utility. A physical book is also a cultural object, one that carries meaning not just in what it says, but in what it represents. It exists simultaneously as information, artifact, and symbol. which is why it continues to hold value even in a world where digital versions are often more efficient. At the most visible level, books function as markers of identity. A bookshelf is rarely just storage. It is a curated display of interests, beliefs, and intellectual history. The titles someone keeps in their home communicate subtle signals about who they are or who they aspire to be. Unlike digital libraries, which are private and invisible, physical books occupy shared space. They participate in the environment of a room, shaping how a person is perceived by others and how they perceive themselves. Books also carry cultural memory in a tangible way. A worn novel, an annotated textbook, or a passed-down collection holds traces of previous readers. Marginal notes, folded pages, and faded covers turn books into personal archives. These physical marks create continuity across time, linking readers not only to authors but to other readers. In this sense, a book is never fully static. It accumulates history through use. Beyond personal identity, physical books serve as cultural symbols of knowledge and legitimacy. For centuries, books have been associated with education, authority, and intellectual seriousness. Even today, academic institutions, libraries, and professional spaces use books as visual shorthand for expertise. A room filled with books still communicates a different kind of credibility than a screen or device. Even if the content itself is identical in digital form, this symbolic weight is deeply ingrained and slow to fade. There is also an aesthetic and emotional dimension to physical books that digital formats struggle to replicate. The texture of paper, the weight of a volume, the smell of aging pages all contribute to an experience that engages the senses in a way screens do not. These sensory details are not essential for comprehension, but they enhance attachment. Many readers describe books not only as things they read, but as objects they remember physically where they were, how they felt, what edition they owned. Physical books also function as cultural carriers across generations. They are gifted, inherited, and shared in ways that digital files rarely are. A child receiving a parent's favorite novel is not just gaining access to a story, but inheriting a piece of personal history. The object itself becomes part of that transmission, making the exchange more than informational. It becomes symbolic and relational. In public and institutional spaces, books continue to shape cultural atmosphere. Libraries, bookstores, and reading rooms are not just distribution points for content. They are environments that signal reflection, learning, and quiet engagement. These spaces persist even as digital access expands because they offer something experiential, a shared cultural setting built around physical presence and collective attention. Ultimately, physical books endure because they are more than vessels for text. They are objects that organize identity, preserve memory, and signal cultural meaning. Even when the same words exist digitally, the physical form adds layers of significance that cannot be fully translated into pixels. In this way, books remain cultural objects not because they resist change, but because they carry meaning that extends beyond the page itself. Books are one of the few widely used technologies that remain readable long after the systems around them have changed. While most digital formats depend on evolving hardware, software, and platforms, books, especially printed ones, maintain a kind of stability that makes them unusually accessible across time. This durability is not accidental. It comes from a simple but powerful design choice, separating information from the need for continuous technological support. A printed book requires no updates, no compatibility checks, and no external infrastructure beyond light and human vision. A novel printed 100 years ago can be opened and read today with no translation layer. This makes books fundamentally different from most modern media, which often depend on specific devices or services. When those systems become obsolete or shut down, the content tied to them can become difficult or even impossible to access. Books, by contrast, remain largely immune to this kind of technological decay. This stability gives books a rare form of permanence. In a rapidly changing information landscape, digital files can be corrupted, formats can become outdated, and platforms can disappear. Even widely used technologies have finite lifespans. What is standard today may be inaccessible in a few decades. Books bypass this cycle because their format is human-readable at a basic, physical level. Ink on paper does not require interpretation by a machine, only by a person. Accessibility across time also means accessibility across generations. A child today can read the same printed book that their grandparents read, without needing conversion or adaptation. The content remains intact, preserving not only the words but also the structure, pacing, and context intended by the author. This continuity allows ideas to travel across decades and even centuries with minimal distortion. In this sense, books act as bridges between historical moments, maintaining a direct line of communication between past and present. Technological accessibility is also about independence. Books do not rely on internet connectivity, subscription services, or proprietary ecosystems. This makes them usable in a wide range of conditions: remote areas, low-resource environments, or situations where technology fails. Even in highly digital societies, this independence gives books a practical resilience. They remain readable in contexts where other forms of media would be unavailable. Libraries amplify this accessibility by preserving books as shared, long-term resources. Unlike personal devices that are frequently upgraded or replaced, libraries function as stable repositories of knowledge that span decades or centuries. A well-maintained library collection can outlast multiple generations of technology shifts, ensuring that older works remain available even as newer formats emerge. This institutional support reinforces the book's role as a long-term storage system for human knowledge. There is also a cognitive aspect to this accessibility. Because books do not require navigation through interfaces or platforms, they reduce barriers to entry. Reading a book is a direct interaction with content, without the need to learn or adapt to changing systems. This simplicity makes books accessible not only across time but across varying levels of technological familiarity. The experience of reading remains consistent even as surrounding technologies evolve. In a broader sense, books represent a form of technological humility. They do not attempt to constantly upgrade or integrate with new systems. Instead, they rely on a stable, low-maintenance design that prioritizes longevity over novelty. This design choice is what allows them to persist through waves of technological change that render other media obsolete. Ultimately, books remain accessible across time and technology because they are built on permanence rather than dependency. Their resilience is not about resisting innovation, but about existing alongside it without being disrupted by it. In a world where most information systems are temporary, books continue to function as one of the most reliable ways to preserve and access human knowledge across generations. Reading is often described as a simple act of decoding text, but psychologically it is much more complex. When a person reads, they are not only processing words on a page, they are constructing meaning, simulating experiences, and maintaining sustained attention over time. The psychology of reading reveals why books feel so different from other forms of media, and why they continue to shape how people think, imagine, and remember. One of the most distinctive features of reading is its demand for active imagination. Unlike visual media, which provides ready-made images and sounds, text requires the reader to generate mental representations. When a novel describes a room, a character, or an event, the brain fills in the sensory details. This process engages multiple cognitive systems at once, blending language comprehension with visual imagination, memory, and emotional processing. As a result, reading becomes a co-creative act between author and reader. This active construction also explains why reading can feel immersive. As attention stabilizes on a narrative or argument, the brain begins to simulate the world described in the text. Characters can feel psychologically real, and abstract ideas can take on vivid structure. This immersive quality is closely tied to sustained attention. Reading requires the mind to hold a consistent focus over extended periods, which allows mental models to develop and deepen rather than reset every few seconds. As often happens in more fragmented media environments, memory plays a central role in the reading experience as well. Unlike short-form content, which is often consumed in isolated bursts, books require the reader to maintain continuity across pages. chapters, and sometimes entire volumes. The brain must constantly integrate new information with what has already been read. This ongoing synthesis strengthens working memory and reinforces long-term retention. It also creates a sense of progression, where earlier ideas remain active in the background as new ones are introduced. Emotion is another key component of reading psychology. Stories, in particular, activate emotional empathy by allowing readers to experience events from the perspective of others. This is sometimes described as narrative empathy, where the reader temporarily adopts the thoughts and feelings of characters. Even nonfiction reading can evoke emotional responses when ideas connect to personal beliefs or lived experience. This emotional engagement helps anchor information in memory and makes reading feel personally meaningful rather than purely informational. Attention regulation is perhaps one of the most important psychological aspects of reading. In order to follow a text, the mind must resist distraction and maintain focus over time. This is not a passive state. It is an ongoing cognitive effort. Over time, regular reading can strengthen the ability to sustain attention, making it easier to engage with complex material. In this way, reading not only requires focus, but also trains it. Reading also creates a unique relationship with time. When deeply engaged, readers often experience a form of temporal distortion, where external time becomes less noticeable. Hours can pass without awareness, replaced by the internal rhythm of the text. This altered sense of time is linked to immersion and attentional stability, and it contributes to the feeling that reading is both absorbing and reflective. Another important psychological dimension is interpretation. Unlike many forms of media that deliver fixed meanings, reading allows for ambiguity and personal inference. Readers actively construct interpretations based on prior knowledge, context, and perspective. This makes reading a flexible cognitive process, where meaning is not simply received, but negotiated. Two people can read the same text and walk away with slightly different understandings, reflecting the interpretive nature of human cognition. Ultimately, the psychology of reading reveals it to be far more than a passive activity. It is a deeply interactive mental process that engages imagination, memory, emotion, and attention simultaneously. Reading shapes not only what people know, but how they think, encouraging patience, depth, and the ability to hold complex ideas over time. Books are often described as an old medium, but that framing misses an important reality. Books have repeatedly adapted to new technologies without losing their core identity. Rather than being replaced by digital media, books have expanded into new forms that preserve long-form reading while reshaping how it is accessed, distributed, and experienced. This adaptability is one of the key reasons books have remained relevant in a rapidly changing media landscape. One of the most significant transformations, the rise of ebooks, digital reading devices, and apps, have changed the physical relationship between reader and text. Instead of holding paper, readers interact with screens that can store thousands of titles in a single device. This shift has made books more portable and more accessible than ever before. Entire libraries can now fit in a pocket, reducing the barriers of space, weight, and physical storage. Despite this change in format, the essential structure of the book, linear, chapter-based, and author-driven, remains intact. Audiobooks represent another major adaptation. By converting text into spoken word, books have become accessible in situations where traditional reading is not possible, such as commuting, exercising, or performing other tasks. This format expands the reach of books to new contexts and audiences, including people with visual impairments or reading difficulties. While the sensory experience changes from visual to auditory, the narrative and intellectual content remain consistent, demonstrating that books can shift form without losing substance. Digital publishing platforms have also transformed how books are produced and distributed. Self-publishing and online marketplaces have lowered the barriers for authors, allowing more voices to participate in the literary ecosystem. This has diversified the range of available books and reduced dependence on traditional gatekeeping institutions. At the same time, it has increased the volume of published material, making curation and discovery more important than ever. Books have not disappeared in this environment. They have multiplied and diversified. Even the concept of what counts as a book has expanded. Long-form essays, serialized online novels, and interactive digital narratives blur the boundaries between traditional books and other forms of writing. Yet these hybrid forms often still rely on the same foundational principles: sustained argument, narrative development, and structured progression of ideas. In this sense, adaptation has not dissolved the book, but stretched its definition. Libraries and educational systems have also evolved to accommodate new formats. Many libraries now offer digital lending services alongside physical collections, allowing users to access books remotely. Educational institutions integrate printed textbooks, PDFs, and digital platforms within the same curriculum, rather than replacing print. Digital tools have been layered on top of it, creating a hybrid ecosystem where multiple formats coexist. Another important dimension of adaptation is how reading habits themselves have changed. While attention spans are often described as shrinking, many readers still seek out long-form content through different channels. Online platforms host essays, serialized fiction, and book discussions that extend the life of traditional reading culture into digital spaces. Book clubs now exist both in person and online, creating communities that form around text regardless of format. What makes this adaptation particularly notable is that the core function of books has remained stable. Whether printed, digitized, or narrated, books continue to serve as vehicles for extended thought, storytelling, and knowledge transmission. The surrounding technologies have changed, but the internal structure carefully developed, ideas unfolding over time, has persisted. Ultimately, adaptation through new forms shows that books are not defined by their physical medium alone. They are defined by their capacity to organize language into sustained, meaningful sequences. As technology continues to evolve, books are likely to keep changing shape, but their underlying role as a framework for deep communication is likely to remain constant. Books have long been intertwined with education, not simply as tools for learning, but as the structural backbone of how knowledge is organized, transmitted, and evaluated. Even as classrooms adopt digital platforms and interactive media, books remain deeply embedded in institutions because they provide something uniquely stable, a standardized, coherent, and citable form of knowledge that can persist across time, instructors, and systems. At the core of formal education is the need for shared reference points. A textbook or assigned reading creates a common, intellectual foundation for students and teachers. Unlike scattered online sources, books are curated into a sequence of ideas that build upon one another in a controlled way. This structure allows institutions to design curricula that progress logically, ensuring that learners move from basic concepts to more advanced ones in a deliberate order. Without this scaffolding, education would become fragmented, with less consistency in what is taught and how it is understood. Books also play a crucial role in establishing authority and credibility in academic environments. Scholarly books and textbooks undergo processes of editing, peer review, and institutional approval, which signal that the information has been vetted. In this sense, books function not just as carriers of information, but as markers of legitimacy. When a subject is taught through a book, it is often because that material has reached a level of stability and consensus within a field. This gives students a reliable foundation from which they can later explore more contested or emerging ideas. Another reason books stay central to education is their ability to provide depth. Scholarly disciplines frequently demand lengthy elaborations, background history, and thorough logical development. While a single article or lecture can introduce a topic, books enable its full development. They may integrate definitions, examples, counterarguments, and methodological explanations into one unified framework. Consequently, they are especially well suited for fields where comprehension relies on tracing how concepts interlink across multiple levels of complexity. Institutionally, books also serve as long-lasting instructional resources. A thoughtfully crafted textbook can stay relevant for years, or even decades, requiring only small updates. This extended lifespan facilitates the ability of educational institutions to sustain program continuity. Educators may design lesson plans using stable references, allowing students to depend on consistent materials throughout the academic year. Although digital resources offer flexibility, they frequently evolve too rapidly to fulfill this stabilizing function independently. Libraries additionally strengthen the institutional foundation of books. Academic libraries serve not only as stores of written materials, but also as archives of intellectual heritage. They house both historical and modern pieces, enabling scholars and students to follow the evolution of concepts across different eras. Such continuity is vital in higher education, where grasping a discipline typically demands engagement with both its historical roots and its present condition. Books enable this by serving as lasting, preservable containers of knowledge. As education shifts toward digital formats, books remain influential in determining how learning materials are organized. Most online courses remain structured around textbook chapters or readings equivalent to entire books. PDFs and digital textbooks mirror the structure of print instead of supplanting it. This implies that the book functions not merely as one format among many, but as a structural framework that educational systems continue to depend on. Even as the medium evolves, this institutional dependence also carries a psychological component. In educational environments, books foster a feeling of advancement and accomplishment that is vital for learning. Completing a book indicates that one has mastered a specific set of knowledge. Achieving a sense of finality is more difficult in perpetually evolving digital spaces, where data is continuously modified and augmented. Books offer a contained intellectual journey that fits neatly into grading frameworks, course outlines, and academic checkpoints. In the end, books stay central to education because they simultaneously address multiple institutional challenges by standardizing knowledge, fostering deep understanding, ensuring long-term stability, and providing clear frameworks for and evaluation. While emerging technologies are transforming classrooms, books remain the foundational structure that ensures educational systems stay coherent and linked to a common body of knowledge. Ultimately, the enduring role of books stems less from resisting change and more from their inherent suitability. Despite the rise of evolving technologies, accelerated media, and novel communication channels, books endure because they address specific challenges that newer systems have not entirely supplanted. They decelerate thought in a rapid-paced era, safeguard meaning across generations, transform culture into physical artifacts, and offer a steady framework for education and understanding. What emerges from every angle is that a book's identity extends beyond its physical form. They are characterized by their capacity to foster sustained attention, layered understanding, cultural continuity, and shared reference. Regardless of the medium, be it paper, screen, or spoken word, the core architecture stays consistent, a meticulously sequenced progression of concepts that requires the reader's investment of time and offers profound returns in exchange. Books have always been dynamic and never required to remain static. Their resilience stems from adapting while retaining their core identity. Although most media formats surge and vanish rapidly, books endure because they fulfill a more foundational function in human thought and culture. They are not merely one of many methods for consuming information. Rather, they represent a fundamental way humans have developed to think, remember, and create meaning, provided that society prioritizes depth rather than speed, continuity instead of fragmentation, and reflection over reaction. Books are unlikely to vanish. Though their forms may shift repeatedly, their function as containers for enduring human thought will stay unaltered.